All right. So first topic. At one point in time, we had a capacity planning issue where we were going to measure how much headroom we had before we hit the scalability wall. And I know we have some anecdotal information, and the capacity planning issue itself was actually closed, and we don't have specifics that I'm aware of. And sadly, I don't see Alberto or Jose, who are probably best suited to answer those questions. So does anybody know if we have these specific measures in place? Like I've seen anecdotally, like CPU, we're probably like double provision on what we need. And I've seen measurements on other areas, but do we have one single source of truth that says how over provision we are, or how much headroom we have for our primary database?
No, but I can bring an update on the effort that has been done so far. And actually, it's been reinstated these days. So basically, in part also the migration, the upgrade to 11, there was the idea of try to run the specific existing benchmark for GitLab GPT, if I recall correctly, by that's acronym, right? To do first regression benchmarking for Postgres 11, and then to scale it up for capacity planning purposes. But the GPT tool was a discussion with the team behind it. They said that it's not yet for this usage ready. So for the upgrade, we had to write a custom benchmarking tool that was used only for and it's likely because time was constrained for performance regression on Postgres 11 upgrade. Now this tool could be leveraged and used more thoroughly for capacity planning. Basically, it recorded. It has like a simulation of the most frequent queries with random parameters, and they can be replayed at higher speeds. This tool can be leveraged for capacity planning, and actually Alberto asked on the team to do this, to start doing this. Ideally, I'll get back to the GPT development team and start the work to also make this tool, because it's already a tool designed for this, to be used for this, but that will apparently take a lot of effort. So I guess shorter time we can continue with the tool we developed and improve it. It will also take a bit, but probably we're talking about days or a couple of weeks more than anything else to try to get it to the point where we can do a capacity planning.
Okay. Are there issues that you can link here that we can follow along with?
I'll link them there. I need to search for them, then I'll link them there. Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. But I guess the unstated comment here is we're not hitting a wall right now. We feel like we're comfortable with headroom. I think a month or so back, we said we felt like we still had probably a year or more horizon on growth, given the current provision hardware and known growth statistics. I don't see anybody shaking.
I don't know exactly what to say there. Yes, we're probably over provisioned in terms of CPU. I'm not that sure we are totally over provisioned in all the areas. There's a lot of disk usage, and sometimes it hit the walls on the maximum disk speed. On the other side, there's potentially, we are running with very old CPUs right now. And if at some point Google would decide to give us the pleasure of having some modern CPU on the US East 1, then we could also have more headroom there.
Okay. Just quickly, what CPUs are you talking about, Alvaro? Because we're moving a lot of stuff to C2s in that region.
So yeah, so there's no second generation instances. We're running on N1, N1 HiveMem 96 right now, and this is first generation. There is the second generation, which at least on N instances is not present on USS. Last time I checked, and that was a couple of weeks ago. And other than N2, we submitted a request that I think was not approved in time for this upgrade to 11, to also switch to moderner CPUs from N1 series, so basically to jump from Haswell to Skylake, and I believe we are still on Haswell. But basically, Google provides N2 instances which are significantly more modern and can scale more on several regions, but not on this one.
Yes, unfortunately, we can't get N2 in all of the availability zones in US East 1. We can only get it in 2 of the 3 that we use. But we can get C2 in all 3.
How is that? Is C2? I mean, is it a much better? Is it much better, much more performant C2 or?
C2 is the same as N2, except higher clock rate and slightly more expensive.
But the
Basically, I
price
think
difference
it's a
is
difference
massive.
in what turbo
Negligible.
boost frequencies are available to the nodes. But it's the same generation as N2.
So C2 compare Haswell on N1, which is what I believe where we are right now. Yeah, Haswell Skylake, but I believe we're still on Haswell. Should provide significant difference. Yes.
Yeah, with Redis, we've seen a very big step up.
Yeah.
And we're running it on the
pretty
web
much
server.
everywhere.
But the main point is that we know that we have some headroom there. So it's not that we don't believe that we need it now, but it's good to know that that'll be an easy fix, kind of easy.
Okay. Anything else we want to cover on that topic before we move on to the next? Andrew, you were going to say something about pricing, if I heard the voices correct.
No, I just wanted to say that it's slightly more expensive, but like our experience has been that because of the extra power that we've got, it's actually costing us less because we have smaller fleets. So, but that's obviously different from how you'd use it for Postgres, right? But for web fleets, it means we can do more with less nodes, and so it's actually a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, I think for Postgres, it's going to be an improvement anyway, simply because we're like I've said previously, we're way overscaled in terms of CPUs. We could easily cut our number of cores by half just on N1. So going to C2, we could easily cut the number of cores in half, which would save us money overall.
That's interesting. Anyway, yeah, so I didn't say anything at the beginning because Alvaro was talking, but we're working on this. Jose, who's off today, by the way, is out of the office today, and Congress through Alvaro and myself, we're working on this as of mid last week, because Craig and myself we agreed that this was a priority. We wanted to clarify this as soon as possible.
And then Christopher asked below about table row size. I know we have an issue out there.
Originally, we had like another issue where we were talking about table spaces and counters associated with those table spaces. I think that they all got addressed such that the overhead that we're back in a sane state. But I just was checking whether that's something else we want to monitor periodically, or if there's alarming already set for it.
Thought there was alarming set for it, but maybe Alberto or Alvaro can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Idea. But do we know anything else about that?
By far the biggest table has been the merge request diffs, right? And that's the most problematic. And there is a quite slow going migration to move those to object storage. But I don't know what the second biggest is, but as far as I know, that's the biggest by some stretch. But I don't have any of the details.
Yeah, so that's all. Is just you were asking which ones should we be measuring. It feels like that's another one that we should measure.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Andreas. You want to verbalize your bullet points here?
Sure. So for the lack of a better term, I've called that anti-sharding features, and I think this is something that we should talk about more. I think there's product questions buried in that, and also organizational questions. But maybe I can first try to explain what the anti-sharding features are. So I think something that's been sort of accepted that we go with is a namespace sharding idea. That's saying that many features and their data, they live inside a namespace, and that's what enables us to apply this idea to GitLab product. But then on the other hand, reality is also that it's not exactly aligned with that. So we have features that don't live inside a namespace at all, or they are being accessed from a different perspective. For example, users are global. They are not within a namespace, so they can work in many different namespaces. And there are a couple of examples for that where we know that those features they're not going to play nicely with namespace-based sharding. And that's really not a choice of whether or not we do it on the database level or on the application level, or it even surfaces with partitioning, that you're basically optimizing for one thing and then you have a couple of other things that don't go well with that pattern. And I think at this point, it would be interesting to identify those features more, and then also talk about how we want to tackle those going forward. For example, on the users, since they're global now, we might want to ask do we want to go in a direction where those are confined to a namespace? So as a user, can you only sign up within a particular namespace? Sort of reflecting the idea that people only care what is inside their namespace. If a customer is inside a namespace, their users only care about their namespace. Is this something that we want to go into? Is this a direction that we want to go into? That might also, I think that's very relevant for GitLab Com, but perhaps there are also different trade-offs for self-hosted installs.
Another example, which we mentioned like briefly in our call earlier, Andreas, but it's worth just mentioning to people, is anything that's got an auto increment key. That is one of those things as well. Like, you know, like a user ID or even a job ID on a pipeline job that has a globally incrementing auto ID needs to be considered in the same discussion.
Right. And sorry, Christopher, go ahead.
Andres, I was just going to say that, you know, I think obviously the first step is to recognize these. My suggestion is if it doesn't work or we think there's a better strategy, that's fine. But to raise it with the specific feature teams to see if we can get them to potentially start working the issue, because you know, the DB team can't scale out to solve everybody's problem. We got to get these back to the feature teams potentially. From that perspective to be managed. And, you know, like one of the, I hate to say it this way because it sounds incorrect, but you know, thinking about it more, it's probably the right way to be thinking about it anyways, is, you know, if you have a feature that you want to run on .com and it can't scale, then that's fundamentally something that, you know, Sharding is supposed to help solve, right? So it feels like that really is feature team's responsibility to make sure that they're fitting in the framework so that they can scale effectively. So maybe, you know, we would obviously not turn off any existing features, but we would probably prioritize it highly for them to go work that so that they could get it addressed.
Mm-hmm. And currently we're going with the audit log feature. And even there, even if that's a quite separate feature, or quite a small feature in GitLab, it's not very much entangled with everything else. But even there, we already recognize that there are different ways of using the audit log, and I think this is a really good example where we can work with the backend team owning that feature, figure out how to do that going forward. If we apply a namespace based partitioning idea, how do we deal with the sort of cross-cutting anti-sharding access patterns, because they become more expensive, or they even break if we don't design them differently.
How long do we think it would be to create the list of the ones that we know about? Like, do you think that's something you could get back within a week, or is it like a couple weeks?
Well, I don't know if that's going to make for a complete list, but like identifying, I was going to identify a couple of good examples for those anti-sharding features. Perhaps not a complete list, but surely something.
That's fine. It doesn't have to be complete. I'm just trying to get a sense for, are there a handful of these, or are there tens of these, or are there hundreds of these? That's what I'm trying to get at more than anything else, because how we attack it may change based on the answer to that question. At least some sense for it, you know, from that perspective.
I think the fundamental feature is really the users one, because users is sort of on the same level as a namespace. It's both global and that really makes it a hard problem in that case. That's why I was wondering if we have a sort of strategy going forward to perhaps confine those users into the namespace. If that is something that we can even do on GitLab.com, or that wouldn't be acceptable.
Yeah, and our one product rep had to just jump off for kickoff meeting. So, and then the other concern is, even if we're trying to constrain it to namespaces, that timeline doesn't really sync up with what we're trying to do with sharding. If we're trying to implement sharding now to solve some early scalability problems, then the timelines don't seem to sync. And we'd have to find a way to iterate on that, maybe feature by feature. And I'm not, there'd be a lot of discovery that would need to be done there. So, and part of this discussion, sorry if I'm stepping on what you were going to continue with, Andreas, part of this discussion came with our conversation with Sid last week when we talked about our approach with audit logs and focusing on the created at date. And he was concerned that that's a local optimization, as listed here under the first bullet point of D. And using the specific audit log functionality. If we partitioned on namespace, then that would, we believe, it would break some functionality within GitLab, like the instance-wide audit log view. It probably wouldn't work if we left everything else in place and we partitioned on namespace, whereas we pretty sure that performance and functionality would be greatly increased by focusing on partitioning on the date.
Yeah, so for the audit log, the date is sort of ideal with the features that we know already, and in that sense, it's a good choice for the audit log. But if we wanted to sort of strategically explore how do we deal with those patterns, like how do we deal with those anti-sharding features, and perhaps discover a good example for that. We could also explore the idea of applying the namespace-based partitioning approach, and then figuring out how to deal with the admin view, how to deal with the by user view. I think that would be sort of valuable for us to figure out, because it's such a good example that we are going to see more of if we follow that namespace-based idea. But it's certainly not the ideal choice for the audit log as it stands at the moment. But I wonder if we should we rather like try to optimize this particular feature for the audit log as it is now, or do we want to assume that we want to go forward with namespace-based sharding and then explore that more and discover those problems more? Kind of the point we're at the moment.
I have a dumb question here, because even for the anti-sharding, I mean, there might be cases that there are features anti-sharding, but are we blocked from making progress on the sharding based on the namespace? I'm guessing that we can do some sharding or proof of concept here now, when making some progress, while thinking about those anti-sharding features, how we want to deal with that. That's just my thinking at this point. We need to iterate on the ideas instead of have a complete vision or picture what could be the blocking things that we cannot move forward. I mean, at this point, everything is based on the analysis, no fact to support.
Yeah, no, we're not blocked in that sense. We can execute on the by time partitioning, and we can also execute on the namespace-based partitioning. With the latter, we know that some features are going to break. So I think it's sort of we already know this is going to happen, right? And it's not working well with the change that we would implement. So that's why we wonder, like, how would we treat that from a product perspective? Because we can't just let them break, right? But it's not a blocker, but it's a good time to ask that question, I feel.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I agree. This is an open question. We need to keep investigating. But meanwhile, we also want to make some improvements. Progress here to collect the data whether something doesn't work or something actually works to prove it.
Yeah, like this, we could. One thing that we discussed is like going ahead and sort of prototyping each of those paths, so like implementing that by time and by namespace with the existing feature set, and then doing some measurements how things are going. I think from the existing data, we can also already anticipate how that looks like, and that's why we know that things are going to break. But is it something that we should do, like prototype that forward, or because that's nothing that sort of directly feeds back into the product, right? It would be more exploratory at this point in time.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and that leads to the next question about being able to adequately test. And we have an issue that we're asking questions on. Josh was going to follow up with our security folks to make sure that we're okay with the path we identified for testing production-like data. Prototyping does make sense, and want to make sure that people understand it. If we do go with the time partitioning because we get that performance improvement, it still feeds into our, I guess, our research into what implementation of partitioning and sharding will require, and what maybe gotchas that we encounter along the way as we go to the namespace strategy partitioning. And it gets us the advantage of getting that audit log performance improvements as well. So it's not, if we go down a different partitioning strategy, in this case, the time-based, it's not lost effort, if that makes sense. It's just not a perfect alignment with the bigger picture of sharding and partitioning on namespace across the entire database. Any other questions or comments on that topic? All right, and I think in the conversations we've had, we pretty well covered what's been done. So you can read the epic on audit log on what we've identified, what we are, and we have a meeting, database team has a meeting for more specifics on what we're going to implement this week. And then, and that's in details there are in what's happening next. So anything else for this working group meeting? I guess one other thing I will share is Sid did ask for an update on what's been done so far. And rather than trying to read through this whole doc, I tried to summarize in the working group handbook entry here under the meeting recap. And I will keep that going on a weekly basis. All right, if there's nothing else, we'll let everyone go. Thanks, everybody.
Yep.